My daughter, her name is Marina, and she's a beautiful child. She was going off to Bali for a week's holiday with her husband, and she took it. And on the third day, she rang me crying her eyes out. She said, "Dad, I just connected with so many things you spoke about with Mum
Perfect.
and the family. There was a connection, and so I achieved something. That was the connection I
Yeah.
wanted, and that legacy that you want to leave for your kids and your grandkids."
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Unfiltered Voices, the podcast that is all about busting the myth that self-published is second rate. I'm Kelly Nissen. I'm an author coach and a self-published author, and I'll be talking to authors, illustrators, and other self-published industry professionals about their choices, their journeys, and everything in between. So stick around. George Kyriakou, welcome to Unfiltered Voices. I have really been looking forward to having you here today.
Thank you very much, Kelly. It's very kind of you to have me, and it's an honour to be here.
Absolutely my pleasure. So, a little bit about George first before we get started. George was born in a small village in northwestern Greece, and his early years were shaped by the aftermath of war, hardship, and resilience. Discovering the unmarked grave of his sister Agape fueled his curiosity about his family's past and made him even more determined to look into his family history and start preserving their stories for generations to come. At the age of 13, 9 words changed the course of George's life. George, no more school, go and get a job. These words led George to a career in the Australian footwear industry. So, George, the title of your book, If the Shoe Fits, is obviously a nod to your career, but I know that this memoir is not only about the footwear industry. So, can you just tell us a little bit more about your book to start with?
Yes, well, look, Kelly, I had been married for 48 years, and my wife was diagnosed with a terminal cancer, and I was her full-time carer for about 13 and a half years. And when she passed away, I had no purpose. I had lost my routine of getting up and doing all the sorts of things. And after she had passed away, I went back to my roots to find out who I was, basically.
Oh,
And my parents had always spoken about my beautiful sister Guppy, and I kept asking, well, where are photos of her? What did she look like? What happened? What did she die of? And the way they dealt with it was that they didn't forget her. They just wouldn't talk about it. They
right.
just refused to talk about it. So I went to my village in search of doing some legal things. The Greek government had changed the laws, and any people that owned land, and my family still has land because we left in 1951. And you had to register all the titles and get them surveyed and all that. I did that. I was there for 6 weeks. And when I went to my village, I can't speak Greek very well. I can speak a dialect of Macedonian. So when I went to this village, I asked if anyone knew where my sister was buried. And the lady who owned the Tavana called this dear old lady shuffling along with her, in the walking stick and her Velcro slippers. And she asked me, was I George, this boy, Georgie? She said, I remember you when you were just this high. And I asked her in Macedonian if she knew where Agape was. She took me by the hand and walked me up the broken slated tiles of the back of the church, and she pointed to this area behind the church, which is just weeds. And she said, your
Mm.
sister's buried here, along with all the other Kyriakous, but there was no marker there. There was nothing. So my other sister, Sia, was in another village close by, and I called her over and said, look, I've located where Agape is, and I'd like you to do something for me because I have to go back to Melbourne. Can you erect a little marble cross which just says, Agape, daughter of Zisi and Eleni, born 1941, died 1950, may she rest in peace. So anyone that goes to church can light a candle if they wish to do so. And this was the thing that got me inspired about my book mainly. Um, I was back in Melbourne watching the grand final, I think, of Footscray and somebody in the West, and the phone rang, and my sister crying her heart out. And I thought there was maybe a tragedy in the family. And I said, what's wrong? Is there something wrong with John, her husband? She said, no, you've changed my life. And I said, in what way? And she said, well, you know, you asked me to do the cross. I said, yes. She said, well, the man who made the cross happened to live in Thornbury, a Melbourne suburb, for about 30 years, and he decided to go back to Greece to live out his remaining years. He was a stonemason. So he said to me in English, Sia, where do you want this cross? And she said, look, we're not exactly sure, about a metre from the corner of the church around there. So he got a shovel to dig a hole to put a slurry of concrete to set the base of the cross on. And as he was digging, his shovel hit a sharp object or a hard object, and he let down and cleared the area with his hands. And he called my sister over and said, I think you need to come and have a look at this. And when he came, we'd actually located the exact spot of Agape's grave. That was a headstone that he'd uncovered.
Wow.
My sister said every hair on her body just stood up and she cried her eyes out. And that got me inspired. I was really emotional. I'd be lying if I didn't say that I had a shed a tear, quite a good tear, because I was alone. My wife of 48 years had passed away, and I thought, well, I've got to find out more about my family's history. Hence, I went back back to my village for 6 years in a row before COVID kicked in, and really, and one of the problems, Kelly, is that I found that when you should ask questions, when people around you are alive, they can tell you things you don't. I didn't. And when they've all gone and you need to ask someone, hey, what happened here? Who was that? You're relying on secondhand information. And I remember distinctly I had a guilt feeling. My father would tell me some wonderful stories about when they first arrived in Australia. And I said, oh, Dad, you've got to write about it. I'll record it and I'll translate it for you. And I didn't. And both my parents, of course, have gone. And I felt that really as an honour and a tribute to them and my daughter and my grandkids, I would pursue this and follow my dream, which I did. So Hazel was the inspiration behind it, Hazel Edwards. She came to visit me at my place here. She returned some stuff that I'd made, and she noticed a blown-up photograph of my mother and father, black and white photograph, on their wedding day. And my mother was in traditional outfit, the Greek outfit that they got married in. And she was 16 and my father was 18. And she said, well, tell me about, who are they? And I started telling her about my mother and father, and my father in the Civil War, captured by the partisan, and my grandfather coming to Australia when he was 29 on a 3-year contract to cut sugarcane because the Australian government had no workforce and they advertised. So he arrived on a 3-year contract and stayed for 11, and gradually he realised Australia was the place to raise a family. And then just before the World War II started, he started bringing the family out. And of course, we didn't get here to 1951 because of the war and then the Civil War. But by 1951, we were all out here, and I then got serious about finding out more about my family's background, and it was quite not only inspiration but quite humbling, because I keep saying to my daughter and my grandkids, never forget who you are. I was a marketing director of a footwear company and travelled the world 40 times a year for 30 years and travel first class. That means nothing if you forget who you are. So writing this book brought me back to earth because, 35 years ago, maybe 40 years ago, Kelly, I was in London. I actually gained 3 or 4 days and I went and visited my village. I said to my parents, oh, look, I'll go back and have a look around and see what I can find out. When I got there, Mr. Big Shot, smart, I thought to myself, who would live in a rat hole like this? Because poverty was. And when I went back for the first time after my wife passed away in 2016 or 17, the village just wrapped its arms around me and said, "Welcome home." The difference in your perception of life changes, so I'm. Hazel said that the book that I have written is written with a lot of compassion, and I'd like to think that's a very important element in a family history, to have compassion about it.
Absolutely. I think the point that you made about talking to people when they're around and asking those questions, because
So important.
you just think, and I was the same with my grandparents who aren't here now. My grandfather used to tell the most amazing stories. He grew up in Canberra, and I was always like, oh, one day I will. And then
Yeah.
one day it's actually too late to do
Yeah,
that. So
absolutely right, Kelly. Yeah,
yeah,
should do it then. Look, I guess experience and time is a great level, and as people say to me, what university did you go to? And I say, well, look, I'm still attending the University of Life, and I'm
yes,
learning a lot every day.
yeah,
Because I left school at 13, as I said, and I think having that knowledge, and I'm passing that on to my daughter and my grandchildren now. Look, do
yes,
whatever you want to do today, and don't put it off till tomorrow. Then maybe do it now, and
yeah,
attend to it. So important.
yeah. No regrets. Just do it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now you've left that legacy
Yes.
as well. You've passed on your story. So and it is a memoir, but I know this is a very common problem for a lot of people who sit down and they're like, okay, what do you put in?
Yes.
What do
What
you
you put in,
leave
what you
out?
leave out. Yes.
And you've, throughout your life, and then talking about, the stories of your parents and that sort of thing. How did you choose what to include and what
Well,
to
I
not
think
include?
I would have to say that part of the process, Hazel's advice was very helpful, because one of the things I speak about in my book is about my brother. I have a chapter about my brother, who was a very, very successful businessman. He made a lot of money, and in the end, with not all, but some people, they lose the sense of empathy. They just don't have that need to be hugged, and they think they're better than everyone else. So Hazel's advice in the very first draft that I had done on that chapter about my brother said, "Don't shoot the messenger. Don't do things that will cause trouble within the family. You can still tell your story in a more gentler way.
Yeah,
Be truthful, but you don't have to be ruthless about it." And that was helpful. And I think a lot of it really follow your heart. Some things that resonated with me and stuck in my mind. For example, I had rheumatic fever when I was 10 years of age, and my parents both thought, "Oh no, we're going to lose another son at 10," because I lost Agapi at 10. They thought rheumatic fever was a serious illness, and luckily we lived just around the corner from a wonderful GP, and he would visit me every single morning. He would walk from surgery, so I didn't go to hospital. He looked after me, and my parents were so grateful. He basically said that he saved my life. But I missed this one year at school, and I remember my father had a little workshop at the back of the house. It was a 4-bedroom house in a place called Hawthorne or Auburn in Melbourne, and his room was right down the back, out of the way. And this is where he became one of the first people who did outdoor work. This man who started the Dockley Cup in soccer used to bring him alterations, and then eventually started making suits. And I remember in my first year back, going back to school at Auburn Central, he made me an Italian pure wool suit, especially for the school photograph. And
oh wow,
I'm going to tell you, I was the snappiest kid in the school. But what I felt being in that room, listening to my parents just chat away, singing love songs in both Greek and Macedonian, and teaching me how to sew and how to make wax cotton for buttonhole. Memories like that, you just can't buy. So there's some of the things that you you write about, and some of the silly things that you did as a. In those days, there was no internet, and you had to amuse yourself and get out of people, out of your parents' way very quick. So my cousin and I would get up to some very not destructive, but mischievous things, like walking under stormwater drains for about 4 kilometres underground without knowing where we were. You include things like that, which are quite precious to you. But I suppose the love of and the love of and the importance of family, Kelly, is important. My mother suffered leukemia, and the prognosis was not good. And when I was younger, when I was 18, back then I had hair. It was about 30 kilos lighter. And some people say I look like a Greek god. Now I'm just a goddamn Greek, And
I love that.
I made the terrible mistake, Kelly, of falling in love with an Australian girl. Now, the problem was the Australian girl was 6 years older than I, and secondly, she was a divorced lady with a 2-year-old child. So this threw all of my parents' plans that they had. They're going to marry me a Greek girl and go to Fitzroy Town Hall, and they picked the one out for me. And I rebelled and would not have any of that. And literally, I was physically kicked out of my home at the age of 21. In our culture, the eldest son had the rights to basically speak on behalf of your parents. And because my parents didn't speak English so well, he took control and said, "You've got to get rid of her, and if you don't, I'm kicking you out." So I said, "Well, I'm not." So he kicked me out. We had to elope. I didn't invite my parents or any of my relations, and that broke my mother's heart, of course. And going back to the story of her leukemia, she actually called my wife and came into her bedroom, and she begged for her forgiveness before she died. She said, "I want you to know I was wrong. I was frightened. I didn't know what the future was. I was petrified that something would happen to my son, and I would like you to forgive me." But of course, she did. So that really cemented the decision I made. And I think I have a strange promise I made to my parents, and that is that both of them are buried out in a cemetery called Springvale, which is out east of Melbourne. And I promised my father, in particular, because he was the last one to go, it was important to him that the monument is kept clean and flowers. And I go out there, 3 or 4 times a year, and I take my scrub brushes and I do it for them, not because I have to, because I'm honouring that's what they wanted. The things they going back to the village, the things they sacrifice, the life they sacrifice to give us a better life was incredible. And I want to get that message through to my daughter and my grandchildren.
So the original question for people was, how did you choose what to include? And your answer was just go with your heart.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. You go with your heart. I suppose, Kelly, it's I've read quite a few memoirs, and some by very well-known celebrities, and some by others, and sometimes I find the ones written by the not so well-known celebrities are the ones that are the most heartwarming. They've got some wonderful stories to tell, but they don't get the opportunity to tell them because of the fact they're not a celebrity, which is I think part of the what would I do? I think maybe I've only been writing for a few short years, but I would think the opportunity for someone who's got a story to tell the story would be a wonderful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's my little sort of catchphrase. It's like, everybody has a story to tell, and everybody has the right to tell it.
Absolutely right.
So just moving on to your other writing, you were saying earlier that you've been writing, you've had some short stories published, but If the Shoe Fits, I think, has sparked that love.
Yes.
You. And you were saying that you've just recently signed a contract with Pegasus for your novel, The Outback Redemption.
Correct.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
And that you have a second fiction manuscript, Smoking Tunnels. So neither of these are memoir, obviously, but when we write, whether we write memoir or fiction, there's always a piece of us in there
Yes.
and an experience. So I'm just wondering, with either of those books, if you've drawn on your life experiences here as well, or if something else has inspired you with that.
Well, I think we all do that, Kelly. You're quite right. My novel, The Outback Redemption, was actually inspired by a trip my wife and I did through the Kimberley. Now, in my working life, I travelled 30 to 40 times a year for 30 years all over the world and all over Australia, New Zealand. And I had never seen such majestic beauty as what I witnessed in the Kimberley, just the colours. And I was on a coach tour with 20 other people. The idea occurred to me when I listened to the story that some of the characters on that trip, some of the characters, or quite a few of the characters, are in my book because of their mannerisms and the way they spoke and the way they did. Even the tour director, I spoke to her at length about life and what she did and the driver. And so I've incorporated them in my book, which then becomes, I suppose, a bit of the Oriental Express. Someone did a murder on a coach trip through the Kimberley. And you certainly draw on events that you experienced in your travels.
Yes.
People you met on your travels, and the characters that you met that embedded in your soul. You think, oh, he was just so wonderful. I've got to write about him.
Yes.
And the same thing with my second novel, Smoking Tunnels, is essentially based on Aileen, my wife's mother. She's 99, and I mean the people who work in aged care are fantastic. I personally don't think there's enough done for aged care, but the people that are in aged care, I'm amazed at how many of them are just shoved in there without anyone visiting. They just stay there, their wrinkled hands fold in front of them, and I'm amazed. And so we go in, and I engage with Norma every time I go in. I engage with her because I want her to feel that someone cares. You know, you're just sitting there, and what do you want? You want a cup of tea? And some of the characters I've met in the aged care facility are just the funniest stories you hear from some of the people. So I've incorporated some of those characters under obviously a fictitious name in my book. So I'm very thankful for them.
Having those conversations is, you know, just showing people that, you know, they still matter. But
Kelly, about maybe 18 months ago, one of the daughters of a resident in the facility, I take my hat off to her. She put on a show, and I've been to a lot of exhibitions, a lot of photographic shows, and she photographed about 20 or 30 of the residents' hands, and only their hands, in black and white. And under the photograph, she had a story about their life.
Wow.
It breaks your heart. You know, some of them are authors and built homes and had television executives. And here they are sitting there, and nobody knows what life they led. You know, they led productive lives. They raised families. They had businesses. And here they are with dementia in an old person's home, and they're forgotten, which is really sad.
Yeah, and that goes back to what you were saying earlier about, you know, if you've got questions for your family,
absolutely
ask, you know, let people tell you their stories. Are you self-published, if the shoe fits? Why self-publishing?
I sent the manuscript to maybe 6 or 8 publishers, and they weren't interested. You're unknown, we don't know who you are, da, 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 da. And in doing so, I sought advice. Being a novice, I spoke with Hazel Edwards, and through some contacts, was given the name of a few people in the printing and the bookbinding business, and I sought their advice. And one piece of advice I would give to someone who wishes to self-publish is maybe get second and third opinions, because I was so enthused by the possibility I would have my dream published, I ignored maybe some obvious things. For example, the advice I was given, you should print it in A4 size because it's the most efficient for printing and there's less wasting. And that's probably true, but it doesn't necessarily make the book the desirable book for someone to pick up and read. It's more of a coffee table book.
Yes.
And so one error of judgment I made the first time around was that I would now go back to more traditional size books where people can pick up, because I think hopefully there might be a resurgence back to people picking up books and reading them. And you need one that they feel comfortable with, either reading on a lounge or in bed. And an A4 size book doesn't fit that criteria, unfortunately. I mean, I felt that I would do it quality-wise. You know, I put in top quality paper and I did all those things and colour and you know, tick, 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 tick. But and then when I wanted to promote the book, it was really just family and friends, because you're not known. So I've been selling my book basically through my business card, my email address. I've sold almost 1,000 books, so I've done pretty well for.
That's amazing. That's really good. I mean, that's a lot of legwork too.
It is a lot of legwork, but it's an expensive process, as you know, Kelly.
Yes.
I have a wonderful arrangement. The printer I have lives around the corner from me in Port Melbourne, and he will print as many books as I want. If I want 5, he'll print 5 for me. So I don't have to go out and buy another 300 or 400 and have them sitting there till I sell them. So I'm comfortable with that aspect. So that's one thing I've done right, is I struck a chord with this printer, and part of my background in marketing was you can catch more flies with honey than you can with vinegar. So I'm become friends with him, and I'm welcome into this guy's printing business any day of the week. So that's a plus for me.
That's perfect. It's building up the relationships with people, but also, like you said earlier, do your homework, do your research, really think about, you know, is there another option?
Yes.
Have a look at what other people are doing.
That's perhaps the most important advice that I would give, Kelly, is do your research and don't just accept the first one out of sheer joy that you know you might get your book published, because that's not necessarily the best option for me. Which I discovered as the story unfolded.
Ask those questions.
I look. There's nothing wrong with asking. My wife Aileen said, it's a funny story, Kelly, and I've got to tell them, because when I first met her, I was actually stopped for a cup of coffee, and there was a vacant chair in a cafe in Collingwood, and I said, excuse me, someone sitting there. And she said, no. I said, do you mind if I sit down? And we started talking, and she was actually in this cafe to go and visit an elderly friend of hers who was not well. And after we made the connection, she said, "Oh God, you asked so many questions. I couldn't leave." And that's how we actually got together, by asking a lot of questions.
Oh, that's lovely. That's nice. So that's got to go in a story at some point.